Let's talk about 9/11 and justice. Because when you talk about justice, what does it look like? And if you can't get it, do you settle for the next best thing? Because those are the questions at the heart of the debate over what to do with the 5 men charged in connection to the attacks that took place in America on September 11th, 2001. With that whole debate being reignited this year when we had the huge news that 3 of those men reached plea deals with the US government to avoid the death penalty. And immediately we saw mixed reactions from the public, from politicians, and of course from the families of the victims. But the dominant reaction, the dominant feeling, it was anger. And with that, barely a day had passed before the deal was revoked. You had people saying, why should these men, these fucking monsters, why should they get a deal? And well, the question behind that question is, why, after more than 20 years of having these guys in custody, is that the best we can do? So to try to answer that, we need to go back to the beginning, right? September 11th, 2001. That was when 19 men hijacked 4 commercial passenger planes in the US, with 2 planes being flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, the 3rd plane crashing into the Pentagon, and the 4th plane, which was actually thought to be meant for the White House, ending up in a field in rural Pennsylvania thanks to the heroic actions of passengers and crew on board. And while that day changed the world in a whole lot of ways, one thing no one was really expecting was that we would find and detain the people responsible and never get a conviction. I mean, within months of the attacks, George W. Bush issued an order regarding the detention, treatment, and trial of certain non-citizens in the war against terrorism, with that order basically saying that 9/11 suspects and other foreign terrorists wouldn't be tried in civilian courts. They would be tried in what are called the military commissions at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. And with that, saying that it wouldn't be practicable to apply, quote, the principles of law and the rules of evidence generally recognized in the trial of criminal cases in the United States District Courts. And from the beginning, this idea that when it came to getting justice for the people behind 9/11, the US government wouldn't have to play by the normal rules, it's a big part of the reason why we've never really gotten it. Right? 780 prisoners have passed through Guantanamo since 2002, with only 18 ever being charged with a crime, and of the 8 people who have been convicted, 4 of them got overturned and 2 are still in the process of appeal. And in any case, none of those convictions were directly in connection to 9/11. In fact, only one person has ever been convicted in connection to the September 11th attacks. And that wasn't someone tried in the military commissions. It was a French man who was convicted in a federal court in 2006 for a small part that he played in the plot, with notably there the jury rejecting the death penalty and handing him a life sentence. And the 5 men still facing charges for their alleged roles in 9/11 have all been detained in Guantanamo since 2006. Though importantly, they were picked up a few years earlier, with them spending a few years in a secret CIA prison network. Right? They got the first guy in 2002 in Pakistan. He's accused of organizing the 9/11 cell based out of Germany, including researching flight schools in the US and wiring money to some of the 19 hijackers. Also last year, a military medical panel diagnosed him as having PTSD and psychosis, which his lawyers blamed on his torture by the CIA, with in fact the board finding him mentally unfit to stand trial. And a month later, the judge agreeing that the prisoner was too psychologically damaged to help defend himself. But the charges, they remain against him in the event that he's ever deemed able to assist in his own defense. And as far as the other 4 guys, they're being tried together. Or rather, they will be if there is ever a trial, right? Because they were all captured in Pakistan way back in 2003. And the one with the fewest charges against him, he's accused of helping some of the hijackers with finances and travel arrangements, with also there a Senate investigation indicating that he was likely tortured by the CIA with an enhanced interrogation technique known as rectal feeding, which is something that medical experts have now consistently said is just a form of rape or sexual assault. And according to lawyers, he frequently waives his right to be in court because he finds it painful to sit. Next, you have the guy accused of training some of the hijackers in hand-to-hand fighting, researching flights and timetables, and testing the ability of a passenger to sneak a knife on board a plane. Then you have the guy accused of transferring money from the UAE to some of the hijackers in the US. His lawyers saying based on what they know about his abuse in CIA custody, he's the basis for one of the characters in the movie Zero Dark 30, right? One who was beaten, waterboarded, and hung by his wrists. And then finally, you have the alleged mastermind behind 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He's also known as KSM, and he's the guy who allegedly proposed the plan for 9/11 to Osama bin Laden in 1996. And he's believed to have overseen the plan's execution, including by training some hijackers in Afghanistan and Pakistan, with him reportedly being waterboarded 183 times. And notably, when he and others were taken to Guantanamo, the cases against them couldn't even get off the ground before they had their first hiccup, because in 2006, the Supreme Court rejected Bush's plans to put them on trial before military commissions, with one of the big issues there being that Bush had established them without congressional authorization. So to get around that same year, Congress passed the Military Commissions Act, right? And that legislation officially broadened the definition of enemy combatants beyond the traditional definition used in wartime. So with that, it stripped Guantanamo detainees of a habeas right to challenge their detention in court. And actually, that's just one of the ways the rules of the military commissions violate our traditional understanding of due process. With another big one being that unlike in normal courts, what's known as hearsay evidence has generally been understood to be admissible. And so that means an FBI agent, for example, could take the stand and talk about statements he collected years ago through an interpreter from unidentified people in a foreign country. And those secondhand statements would be considered evidence. And those original witnesses, they don't have to be called in or take an oath or answer any questions because the agents who spoke with them wouldn't even know how to find them, right? And then there's the issue of classification, with the defense not allowed to see all the evidence against them because a lot of it's confidential. And in fact, besides documents, the identities of a large number of potential witnesses, such as people who worked in black sites, are actually classified. So, the defense, they can't call them because they don't know who they are. And finally, the big one, the torture question. Statements derived from torture or cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment can't be used in federal court. But in the military commissions at Guantanamo, it's been an ongoing debate. And, I'll get to more of that in a second, but the point is, all that debate, discussion, and most importantly, litigation around these issues, they've kept this case from going anywhere, right? I mean, the suspects were first charged in the military commissions in 2008 with prosecutors seeking the death penalty. But then when Obama came to office, he suspended the case and announced that KSM and the others would be tried in a civilian court in Manhattan, with prosecutors still seeking the death penalty. Though, of course, this sparked outrage among some politicians as well as a lot of the 9/11 victims' family members. So with that, lawmakers passed restrictions prohibiting the transfer of terror detainees to the US. But then all of that leading to the administration announcing that it'd be handing the case back to the military in 2011. But notably, this came after Obama signed updated legislation to reform the military commissions, with one of the key changes being to explicitly ban statements obtained through torture or through cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment as evidence. Although it left the door open for the admission of some coerced statements and hearsay evidence. And so with that, critics said that the commission still offered a second-class system of justice designed to obtain quick convictions. But of course, we're talking about this today, so it didn't work out at all, with all those issues continuing to be litigated. And the debate about torture, it's just evolved, right? While it became clear that statements obtained under torture at CIA black sites were no good, what about statements given later? Because you see, in 2007, an FBI clean team questioned the suspects over several months without torturing them. But there, the defense claims that these interrogations were still tainted by torture, them saying that their clients had been conditioned by that point to provide answers that would please their interrogators. So as of now, it's still something being dealt with. And then, some of the stuff that's caused delays, it's almost comical. In 2013, for example, it was just a 5-minute phone call that ended up helping set the case back at least a year. Because what happened there was that one of the suspects asked his attorneys to pass along a message to his brother in Yemen. And there, US officials feared that it was actually a coded communication to Al-Qaeda operatives. And then in 2019, hearings were delayed after the judge at the time had to be flown back to the US for an urgent eye surgery. Also, speaking of the judges, we just keep getting new ones, right? The first one lasted until 2018. That's when he retired and named his successor. But then that guy stepped aside after only 9 months. But then the next guy making it less than a year before retiring. And then the guy after him, he quit after just 2 weeks. And so they replaced him with someone named Judge Matthew McCall, but he'd been a judge for less than 2 years at the time, which was against the rules. So someone else then stepped in temporarily, and then another guy came in for a bit. And then when Judge McCall had 2 years experience under his belt, he came back. But of course, less than 2 years later, he also announced his retirement. Though then this year, he said he'll delay his retirement at least through the end of 2024. And of course, with that, every personnel change comes with its own little delays, and those add up. And actually with that, the last big thing is that our own intelligence agencies actually may be intentionally holding the process up. Like in 2014, for example, it came out that the FBI have tried to recruit a member of the defendant's legal team as a confidential informant. And then the CIA has also faced allegations like cutting off audio and video feed at a hearing, hiding microphones in the prison, and sending an interpreter to spy on the defense. Right, with the suspicion there being that the agency is trying to undermine the process and keep the full extent of what happened to those men in the black sites from becoming public. So ultimately, with all of that, you have many legal experts agreeing that a verdict in any potential future trial wouldn't survive appeal. And so that is why we have this discussion about plea deals. Right, the idea is that if the government took the death penalty off the table, maybe the 9/11 defendants would plead guilty and give up their right to appeal. So then all of this could be over. And in fact, a group called September 11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, which was actually founded in opposition to the US bombing campaign in Afghanistan after the September 11th attacks, they started pushing for that as far back as 2017. But of course, for a lot of people, that just sounds wrong. And so in 2022, when there started being rumblings that prosecutors were exploring plea deals, it didn't go down well. And when a little over a year later, after progress on a deal had been made and it resulted in headlines like accused 9/11 architect could avoid US death penalty under plea deal proposal came out, shit hit the fan. You had some 9/11 families completely outraged. And in fact, more than 2,000 victim family members wrote an open letter to Biden protesting the plea deal. And all of that leading to Biden himself rejecting the plea deal on the table. But of course, less than a year later, this year, a new deal for 3 of the 5 defendants was reached, with it coming during the 51st round of pretrial hearings in the case since arraignment in 2012. And we immediately saw this same cycle play out. Right? One woman whose husband and brother-in-law were killed at the World Trade Center telling the New York Times, "I really did want the death penalty. They did kill 3,000 4,000 Americans and people are still dying from post 9/11 cancer. But then, on the flip side, a member of September 11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows whose sister was killed on 9/11 told the Washington Post, "I would have liked a trial of men who hadn't been tortured, but we got handed a really poor opportunity for justice, and this is a way to verdicts and finality. That's what I consider this." And all of this is, of course, politics are at play as well, with, for example, Mitch McConnell condemning the move as, quote, "a revolting abdication of the government's responsibility to defend America and provide justice." J.D. Vance slamming the deals at a rally, saying, "We need a president who kills terrorists, not negotiates with them." And ultimately, whether it was due to political pressure or not, that deal has been taken off the table, and so we're left in the same situation, right? And with that, according to Scott Rome, director of the D.C. office of the Center for Victims of Torture, the 9/11 case is not going to trial in the military commissions. It is not remotely close to that, and it never will be. So for anyone who objects to resolving the case with a plea agreement, I'd ask them, what's the alternative? And if that's true, the question we started this with, it remains. Right? Whether you believe in the death penalty or not, these men should be tried in a court of law. But what we've seen is that the US government has fucked up so many times that might never happen now. So from a legal standpoint, do you then settle for the next best option, especially if it's being said that it is the only option left? And yeah, I'd really love to know your thoughts wherever you land on this.